The message tore through the silence of deep space like a scream in the dark. Across 47 star systems, communication arrays lit up with the same desperate signal. It was not a request. It was not a negotiation. It was a plea for survival from the most powerful empire the galaxy had ever known. The Zirathi Empire, rulers of nearly 50 worlds, masters of technology that could reshape planets and weapons that could shatter moons, were begging for help. Admiral Kreneth stood on the bridge of his flagship, his 4 arms trembling as he watched another colony fall on the tactical display. The green dot representing Zirathi Prime 7 flickered once, twice, then turned red. Gone. 3 million souls consumed in less than 6 hours. That made 12 colonies lost in 3 weeks. 12 worlds that had stood for thousands of years, wiped clean of all life as if they had never existed at all. His communications officer turned to him with wide, terrified eyes. The fear was spreading through his crew like poison. They had never known defeat before. They had never known terror like this. Kreneth forced his voice to remain steady as he gave the command that would change everything. Send the distress call to the Galactic Council. Send it to every species, every fleet, every world that might have the power to help them. But he added one final instruction, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. Make it clear. Anyone but the humans. His officer hesitated for just a moment, then obeyed. The message went out across the galaxy, translated into 600 languages, broadcast on every known frequency. It was simple and devastating in its honesty. The Zirathi Empire is falling. We face an enemy we cannot defeat. We have lost 12 colonies. Our fleets are broken. Our weapons are useless. We require immediate military assistance from any species capable of providing it. We will pay any price. We will grant any favor. We will surrender any territory. Please help us. But keep the humans away. On the Galactic Council station orbiting the neutral world of Axios Prime, the message hit like a bomb. The Council Chamber, a massive circular room where representatives from 37 species gathered to maintain peace and order across the known galaxy, erupted into chaos. Council members shouted over each other in a dozen different languages. The Zirathi were the strongest military power in the galaxy. If they were falling, what hope did anyone else have? Ambassador Thyron of the Kaerwil Empire stood and called for order. His species were known as the finest warriors in the galaxy. They had never lost a battle in 3 centuries of recorded history. He volunteered his forces immediately. We will send our Crimson Fleet. Whatever is destroying the Zirathi will not survive contact with Kaerwil Steel. Other species pledged support. The Manthari offered their defensive technology. The Sulvek promised their fastest ships for evacuation. The Vorath brought ancient weapons from their vaults that had not been used in 1,000 years. But in a small corner of the chamber, near the back where the newer, less powerful species were seated, the human ambassador sat quietly. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she was only the 3rd human to ever hold this position. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Council 15 years ago, and many of the older species still considered them primitive, dangerous, and unpredictable. She listened to the panic, the promises, the plans. Then she stood. I move that Earth be allowed to send assistance to the Zirathi. The chamber fell silent. Thyron turned to her with something close to disgust on his face. Did you not hear their message, human? They specifically requested that your kind stay away. Sarah did not flinch. I heard it. But I also heard that they are dying. Personal preferences do not matter when entire civilizations are being destroyed. The Zirathi ambassador, who had been sitting with his head in his hands, suddenly looked up. His voice was sharp with barely controlled fear and anger. We do not want human help. We know what you are capable of. We know what you did to the Krell. We would rather face extinction than allow your monsters near our worlds. Sarah's expression did not change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. The Krell invaded Earth. They killed 4 billion of our people before we stopped them. We did what we had to do to survive. That is exactly why we fear you, the Zirathi ambassador hissed. You do not fight wars. You erase species from existence. You do not know mercy or honor or limits. You are more dangerous than any enemy we could face. Before Sarah could respond, her communication device vibrated. She glanced down at it and her jaw tightened. She looked back up at the council. It does not matter what you decide here. I have just received word that the Earth Defense Fleet has already departed for Zirathi space. They intercepted your distress call 6 hours ago. They will arrive in Zirathi territory in 48 hours. The chamber erupted again, but this time with a different kind of fear. The Zirathi ambassador stood, his voice rising to a shout. You have no authority. We did not give you permission. Call them back. Sarah shook her head slowly. Humans do not require permission to help those in need. You can accept our assistance or reject it, but we are coming either way. Far across the galaxy, in the command center of the human carrier ship Indomitable, Fleet Admiral Marcus Webb stared at the star map showing the Zirathi Empire. His tactical officer approached quietly. Sir, we are receiving multiple messages from the Galactic Council ordering us to turn back. Webb did not look away from the map. Ignore them. Increase speed to maximum. I want us in Zirathi space ahead of schedule. His officer hesitated. Sir, the Zirathi have made it clear they do not want our help. They fear us. Webb finally turned, and there was no humor in his smile. They should fear what is hunting them more. Prepare the fleet for combat operations. And send a message to the Zirathi command. Tell them help is on the way, whether they like it or not. The Vextar swarm moved through space like a living nightmare. From a distance, it looked like a dark cloud spreading across the stars, blotting out their light one by one. But up close, the true horror became clear. Millions upon millions of creatures, each one the size of a small fighter craft, moving with perfect coordination as if controlled by a single mind. They had no ships, no technology that anyone could understand. They were the ship and the weapon and the hunger all at once. Admiral Kreneth watched the tactical display with growing despair as the swarm approached another Zirathi colony. He had seen this happen 12 times now, and every time it was the same. His forces would engage with everything they had, and for a few precious minutes, it would seem like they were winning. Then the Vextar would adapt, and the slaughter would begin. His weapons officer reported that all defensive platforms were online, all fleet positions locked and ready. They had 200 ships defending this colony, twice as many as they had used in previous battles. Surely this time would be different. Fire everything, Kreneth commanded, and the void lit up with enough firepower to crack a planet. Plasma beams, quantum missiles, graviton cannons, every weapon the Zirathi had developed over thousands of years of warfare. The first wave of Vextar creatures simply ceased to exist, vaporized by the incredible heat and energy. For 10 minutes, the Zirathi fleet poured destruction into the swarm. Thousands of creatures died every second. The weapons officer actually smiled for the first time in weeks. We are winning, Admiral. We are actually winning. Then the swarm changed. The creatures began to shimmer with a strange iridescent glow. The next volley of plasma beams hit them and simply splashed away harmlessly like water off stone. The quantum missiles exploded against their hides and did nothing. The graviton cannons, weapons that could tear apart the fabric of space itself, washed over them without effect. In less than 30 seconds, every weapon the Zirathi possessed had become completely useless. The swarm accelerated forward and crashed into the defensive line like a tidal wave of teeth and claws and absolute hunger. Ships that had survived 100 battles were torn apart in seconds. The Vextar creatures latched onto hulls and began to consume them, eating through advanced armor plating as easily as insects through rotting wood. Kreneth watched his fleet die and knew there was nothing he could do to stop it. He gave the order to retreat, the first time in his long military career he had ever abandoned a battle. Those ships that could still move fled. The colony below never had a chance. Within 6 hours, 3 million more Zirathi were gone, consumed by the swarm that never stopped, never slowed, never showed mercy. The distress call reached the Galactic Council, and the KRYLL Empire responded immediately with confidence that bordered on arrogance. Ambassador Thyron himself traveled with the Crimson Fleet, their most elite fighting force. 1,000 ships crewed by warriors who had trained their entire lives for combat. They arrived in Zirathi space with drums beating and war songs echoing through their communications channels. The KRYLL did not know defeat, and they were eager to prove their superiority once again. The Zirathi gave them all the tactical data they had gathered. Thyron reviewed it and dismissed most of it as evidence of Zirathi weakness rather than enemy strength. "The Vextar adapt to energy weapons," he said to his fleet commanders. "Then we will use kinetic weapons. Solid projectiles, explosive charges, old-fashioned violence that cannot be adapted to." The HFY engaged the swarm at the next colony world with a battle plan that was simple and brutal. Massive railguns firing slugs of dense metal at incredible speeds. Missile pods launching thousands of high-explosive warheads. Boarding parties ready to fight the creatures hand-to-hand with blades and strength if necessary. For the first 10 minutes, it worked perfectly. The Vextar creatures were torn apart by the kinetic impacts. They had adapted to energy, but solid matter moving at tremendous velocity still ripped through their bodies. Thyron allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as the kill count climbed higher and higher. Then the creatures began to change again. Their carapaces thickened and hardened, becoming dense enough to deflect the railgun slugs. They moved in swirling patterns that caused the missiles to collide with each other before reaching their targets. When HFY boarding parties managed to close with them in hand-to-hand combat, the creatures revealed retractable claws that could slice through even HFY armor. The warriors who had never known defeat began to die in the cold vacuum of space, their war songs turning to screams. Thyron watched in disbelief as his Crimson Fleet, the pride of the HFY Empire, was systematically dismantled. The Vextar were learning from every attack, adapting to every tactic, evolving in real time to counter everything the HFY could throw at them. After 40 minutes of brutal combat, Thyron gave the order he never thought he would give. "Retreat. Fall back. All ships withdraw immediately." Of the 1,000 ships that had arrived with such confidence, only 400 managed to escape. The rest were left behind, consumed by the swarm or crippled beyond any hope of rescue. The HFY warriors who survived would carry the shame of this defeat for the rest of their lives. Thyron returned to the Galactic Council a broken man. He stood before the assembly and spoke words that no one had ever expected to hear from a HFY. "We cannot stop them. Whatever the Vextar are, they are beyond our ability to defeat. They adapt to everything. They learn from every battle. They cannot be reasoned with or frightened or turned aside. They exist only to consume, and they will not stop until everything is gone." The chamber fell into horrified silence. If the Zirathi and the HFY together could not stop this threat, then what hope did the galaxy have? It was in that moment of despair that new reports came in. Long-range sensors had detected the human fleet entering Zirathi space. They were moving fast, ignoring all hails from Zirathi command, heading straight toward the largest concentration of Vextar swarm. Sarah Chen stood and addressed the council quietly. "My people have arrived. Now we will see if adaptation is enough." The sensors detected them first, appearing at the edge of Zirathi space like ghosts materializing from the void. 200 human vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, their blue-white engine trails cutting through the darkness like blades. On every Zirathi monitoring station, alarms began to sound. Not the alarms that warned of enemy attack, but something worse. The alarms that meant humanity had arrived. Admiral Kreneth stood frozen on his bridge, staring at the tactical display that showed the human fleet moving deeper into Zirathi territory with calm precision. They were ignoring every hail, every warning broadcast, every attempt at communication from Zirathi command. They simply advanced toward the largest remaining Vextar swarm concentration as if they owned the space they were traveling through. "Send the message again," Kreneth ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Tell them they do not have permission to enter our space. Tell them they must turn back immediately." His communications officer worked frantically for a moment, then looked up with frustration. "Admiral, they are receiving our transmissions. They are just not responding. They are acting as if we do not exist." Around the bridge, Kreneth's crew exchanged worried glances. They had all heard the stories about humans. Every species in the galaxy had heard the stories. But hearing about human ruthlessness and witnessing it firsthand were two very different experiences. The humans were not being aggressive or threatening. They were simply moving forward with absolute confidence, and somehow that was more frightening than any show of force could have been. On the Galactic Council observation station, Ambassador Thyron watched the human fleet advance and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Real fear. Not the tactical concern of facing a difficult battle, but the primal terror of confronting something fundamentally different and dangerous. The HFY Empire had fought wars for 3 centuries and never lost. But the HFY had never fought humans, and after what happened to the Vextar swarm, Thyron was grateful for that fact. "How did they get here so fast?" a Manthari observer asked, studying the fleet movements. "Our calculations showed it should take at least another 12 hours for any response force to reach Zirathi space from Earth. The humans have improved their faster-than-light drives," a technical analyst replied quietly. "Their speed has increased by almost 40% since our last intelligence reports. They are advancing faster than we thought possible." Thyron leaned forward in his seat. "What else have they improved that we do not know about? What other capabilities have they developed in secret?" No one had an answer, and the silence that followed was heavy with implications. Supreme Chancellor Vex Nor of the Zirathi Empire convened an emergency session with his top military commanders. The holographic images of his generals floated around him, each one showing the same expression of fear and anger. "They cannot do this," General Thaxron shouted, his 4 arms gesturing wildly. "They have no authority to enter our space without permission. This is an act of war. An act of war against a civilization they are supposedly coming to help. Someone contact the Galactic Council. File a formal protest." "We already did," Vex Nor said tiredly. "The Council is debating the issue right now. But debates take time, and the humans are already here. What do you suggest we do about it?" "Engage them," Thaxron said immediately. "Send our remaining fleet to intercept. Force them to stop and negotiate. Or at minimum, force them to acknowledge our sovereignty over our own territory." Vex Nor looked at his general for a long moment. "You want us to fire on the only species that has shown any ability to stop the Vextar? You want to turn our saviors into our enemies?" Thaxron's confidence wavered slightly. "I want them to respect us. I want them to ask permission before they barge into our space like they own it. They are treating us like children who cannot make our own decisions." Vex Nor sighed deeply. "Perhaps that is exactly what we are at this moment. We could not stop the swarm. We lost 12 colonies. We sent out a desperate plea for help. And now help has arrived, and we are complaining about the manner of its arrival? What does that say about us?" Before anyone could respond, a new communication came through. It was from the human flagship, and the voice that spoke was calm, professional, and utterly unbending. "This is Admiral Marcus Webb of the Earth Defense Fleet. We are aware that we do not have formal permission to operate in Zirathi space. We are also aware that you specifically requested that humans not respond to your distress call. Unfortunately for both of us, humanity does not work that way. When people are dying and we have the ability to stop it, we do not wait for permission. We do not debate protocol. We act. Our fleet is now entering the combat zone where your forces last engaged the Vextar swarm. We recommend that you withdraw your ships to a safe distance and allow us to handle the threat. Once the immediate danger has passed, we can discuss the diplomatic niceties. Until then, please stay out of our way." The transmission ended before anyone could respond. Vex Nor looked around at his assembled commanders and saw his own helplessness reflected in their faces. The humans had just told the Zirathi Empire, rulers of 47 star systems, to stay out of the way in their own territory. And there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. Admiral Kreneth received orders directly from the Supreme Chancellor. "Pull back all Zirathi forces. Maintain observation distance but do not engage the humans under any circumstances. Let them fight the swarm. Let them die if that is their choice. And if they somehow manage to win, then we will deal with the consequences of having humanity in our debt." Kreneth transmitted the orders to his fleet and watched as his ships began to retreat. It felt like cowardice, like abandoning the field to an invading force. But he understood the logic. The humans were not invaders in the traditional sense. They were something far more complicated and far more dangerous. They were self-appointed guardians who did not ask permission to protect others. On the human flagship Indomitable, Admiral Webb studied the tactical displays showing both the Vextar swarm and the withdrawing Zirathi fleet. His executive officer approached quietly. "Sir, the Zirathi have pulled back as expected. We have the field to ourselves." Webb nodded without taking his eyes from the displays. "Good. How long until the swarm reaches us? 47 minutes at current approach speed. The swarm numbers approximately 15 million individual organisms. Webb allowed himself a thin smile. More than enough for our purposes. Deploy the dispersal pods and begin atmospheric saturation. I want the entire combat zone flooded with viral agents before the swarm arrives. And send a message to Dr. Ramirez. Tell her to prepare her presentation for the Galactic Council observers. Once this is over, we are going to have to explain ourselves. His officer hesitated. Sir, what if the Zirathi refuse to accept our help even after we defeat the swarm? What if they demand that we leave and never come back? Then we leave, Webb said simply. We are not here to conquer or to impose our will. We are here to help. The Vextar swarm detected the human fleet from 3 million kilometers away and immediately changed course toward them. This was their pattern, their instinct, their purpose. They sensed life and technology and food, and they moved to consume it with the inevitability of a falling star. On every Zirathi vessel, on every monitoring station, aliens watched the approaching collision with a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction. The humans had ignored every warning, had pushed their way into a battle they could not win, and now they would learn the same terrible lesson that everyone else had learned. The swarm could not be stopped. Admiral Kreneth stood on his bridge, his 4 arms gripped tight behind his back to hide their trembling. He had ordered his remaining ships to maintain a safe distance but keep all sensors focused on the human fleet. If nothing else, they would record how the humans died, and perhaps learn something useful from their inevitable failure. His tactical officer counted down the distance. 2 million kilometers. 1,500,000. The swarm was a writhing mass of organic horror on the visual displays, millions of creatures moving with perfect coordination, spreading out to engulf the human ships from every angle. Kreneth had seen this formation destroy fleets 3 times the size of what the humans had brought. The range closed to weapons distance. Kreneth waited for the human ships to open fire with whatever primitive weapons they possessed. Surely even humans understood that you did not wait for the enemy to reach you. You struck first, you struck hard, and you hoped it was enough. But the human ships did nothing. They simply sat there in the void, their engines powered down to minimum, their weapons cold and silent. 200 human vessels floating in space like sitting targets waiting for slaughter. What are they doing? Kreneth whispered. His tactical officer checked and rechecked the sensor data. Nothing, Admiral. No weapons charging. No defensive fields activating. No evasive maneuvers. They are just waiting. Are they surrendering? Another officer asked. Humans do not surrender, Kreneth said quietly, remembering the reports from the Krell War. They fight until nothing remains. This must be some kind of trap. Across the Zirathi fleet, on the Galactic Council observation station, on every ship that was monitoring the battle, the same confusion reigned. The humans were doing nothing. They had traveled across the galaxy, had ignored every order to turn back, had pushed their way into a war zone, and now they simply floated in space as if waiting for death to come to them. The Vextar swarm reached the human fleet and engulfed it completely. The dark mass of creatures surrounded every ship, blotting them out from visual sensors. Millions upon millions of hungry organisms pressed against human hulls, their claws and teeth seeking purchase, beginning the terrible work of tearing the vessels apart piece by piece. Still the humans did not fire. Not a single weapon discharged. Not a single defensive measure activated. The Zirathi officers began to mutter among themselves. The humans were insane. They had to be insane. No rational species would simply accept death like this. Perhaps they had malfunctioned, or their crews were already dead, or this was some kind of elaborate suicide mission that no one could understand. Kreneth leaned forward in his command chair, his eyes locked on the displays. Something was wrong. The humans had not come all this way just to die quietly. They had a plan, and whatever it was, it terrified him more than the swarm itself because he could not see it, could not predict it, could not prepare for it. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The Vextar continued their assault on the human ships, but something strange began to appear in the sensor data. The swarm's movements were becoming erratic. Individual creatures were breaking formation, spinning away from the human vessels in random directions. Some stopped moving altogether, floating dead in space. Are they fighting back? The tactical officer asked, checking for any sign of human weapons fire. Negative. Still no weapons activity. No energy discharge of any kind. Then why are the Vextar dying? Kreneth demanded. The numbers were climbing on the casualty displays. Hundreds of creatures. Then thousands. Then tens of thousands. All of them simply going still and lifeless, their bodies drifting away from the human ships like leaves falling from dying trees. The swarm was dying, and the humans had not fired a single shot. On the human flagship Indomitable, Admiral Marcus Webb watched the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. His chief medical officer, Dr. Lisa Ramirez, stood beside him monitoring the biological data streaming in from sensors embedded in the hull. "How long until full saturation?" Webb asked. "Already there, sir," Ramirez replied. "Viral dispersion is at 98% coverage of the swarm. Initial mortality rate is exceeding our projections. We are looking at 40% casualties in the first wave." Webb nodded slowly. "Release the second package." Ramirez hesitated for just a moment. "Sir, are you certain?" "Once we deploy all variants, there is no taking this back. We will have introduced multiple engineered pathogens into an alien ecosystem. The long-term consequences could be unpredictable." Webb turned to look at her, his face carved from stone. "Doctor, those creatures have consumed 12 Zirathi colonies. 3 million souls per colony. That is 36 million dead in 3 weeks, and the count is still rising. I am not concerned about long-term consequences for the Vextar. I am concerned about stopping them before they kill anyone else. Deploy the second package." Ramirez sent the command, and throughout the human fleet, specially designed dispersal pods opened and released their contents into space. Billions upon billions of microscopic viral particles, engineered specifically to attack Vextar biology in ways that their rapid adaptation could not counter. Not energy weapons that could be deflected. Not kinetic weapons that could be armored against. Not tactics that could be learned from. This was biological warfare at a level that most species had abandoned centuries ago as too dangerous, too unpredictable, too morally questionable. But humans had never abandoned anything that might help them survive. The second wave of viruses tore through the swarm like wildfire through dry grass. The Vextar organisms began to convulse and die by the millions. Their bodies broke down at the cellular level, overwhelmed by pathogens they had no defense against, no time to adapt to, no way to escape from. On the Zirathi flagship, Kreneth watched the impossible happen. The swarm that had destroyed everything in its path for weeks, the enemy that adapted to every weapon and tactic, was dying in vast numbers without a single shot being fired. His tactical officer turned to him with wide, horrified eyes. "Admiral, what are the humans doing?" Kreneth could not answer. He could only watch as the Vextar casualties climbed higher and higher. 40% dead. 50%. 60%. The remaining creatures were fleeing now, breaking away from the human fleet in panic, something no one had ever seen them do before. They scattered in all directions, desperate to escape the invisible death that filled the space around the human ships. Sarah Chen's voice came through on the Galactic Council emergency channel. Her tone was calm, professional, and utterly cold. The silence that followed Sarah Chen's transmission lasted for almost 30 seconds, an eternity in military communications. Then the Galactic Council channel exploded with voices, all of them demanding answers, explanations, clarifications for what they had just witnessed. Admiral Kreneth silenced his own bridge crew with a sharp gesture and opened a direct channel to the human flagship. His voice was carefully controlled, but the fear underneath was impossible to hide. "Ambassador Chen, what did you do? What weapon did you use against the swarm?" There was a pause before Sarah responded, and when she did, her voice carried a weight that made every alien listening feel a chill run through their bodies. "We used no weapons, Admiral. We used biology." "Biology?" Kreneth repeated the word as if it were foreign to him. "You killed millions of Vextar organisms with biology?" On the human flagship, Admiral Webb nodded to Dr. Ramirez, giving her permission to explain. The doctor activated her own communication channel, and her voice, calm and clinical, filled the void between ships. "When we intercepted the Zirathi distress call 6 hours before the Galactic Council received it, we immediately began analyzing all available data on the Vextar. Your reports were very detailed, Admiral Kreneth. Very helpful. We studied the swarm's biology, their adaptation capabilities, their cellular structure, everything you had managed to scan before your colonies fell. What we discovered was fascinating. The Vextar are incredibly advanced in their ability to adapt to external threats. Energy weapons, kinetic weapons, even radiation and extreme temperatures. They can evolve defensive measures in minutes, sometimes seconds. But that rapid adaptation comes with a cost. Their immune systems are relatively simple, almost primitive. They have never needed strong disease resistance because they adapted to threats too quickly for any natural pathogen to take hold. Kreneth felt something cold settle in his chest. You weaponized disease. You created viruses to attack them. Ramirez continued as if she had not heard the horror in his voice. We engineered multiple viral agents, each one designed to attack different aspects of Vextar biology. The first wave targeted their respiratory system, if we can call it that. The structures they used to process energy and nutrients. The virus essentially caused their bodies to suffocate from the inside, unable to absorb what they needed to survive. We dispersed it into space around our ships and waited for the swarm to come to us. They did the rest themselves. On monitoring stations across the sector, alien observers watched the recorded footage of the battle again, seeing it now with new understanding. The human ships had not been passive targets. They had been bait. Deadly bait that released invisible death into the void, knowing the Vextar would surround them, would press close in their eagerness to consume, would breathe in the very weapon that would kill them. But the swarm began to adapt, a KRYLL observer noted, reviewing the data. We saw the casualties slow after the first 15 minutes. Some of the creatures were developing resistance. Exactly, Ramirez confirmed. We anticipated that. The Vextar are excellent at adaptation, but they need time and exposure to understand what they are adapting to. So we gave them that time. We let them think they were succeeding, let them develop immunity to the first virus. Then we released the second one, and the third, and the fourth. Each one completely different from the last, attacking different systems in different ways. They could adapt to one virus, but not to multiple simultaneous infections that had nothing in common with each other. It was like asking them to evolve defenses against fire and ice and poison all at the same instant. Their biology simply could not keep up. The Galactic Council channel erupted again, but this time the voices were not just confused. They were angry, frightened, disgusted. Ambassador Thyron of the Carewell spoke with barely restrained fury. You unleashed biological weapons on a living species. You created diseases specifically designed to kill. Do you understand what you have done? This is a violation of every civilized rule of warfare. This is genocide. Sarah Chen's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Genocide is what the Vextar were doing to the Zirathi. 36 million dead in 3 weeks. Entire worlds consumed. We stopped it. We did what no one else could do. We saved the Zirathi Empire from extinction. But at what cost? Another council member shouted. What you have released into space, those viruses, they could mutate. They could spread to other species. You have created a weapon that could destroy us all. Our viruses are genetically locked to Vextar biology only, Ramirez responded calmly. They cannot infect any other known species. We made certain of that before we deployed them. They will die off naturally within 72 hours once they have no more hosts. How convenient, Thyron said, his voice dripping with contempt. And we are simply supposed to trust the word of humans? The same humans who eradicated the entire Krell species 50 years ago? The same humans who turned biological warfare into an art form? Sarah's voice went cold. The Krell invaded Earth. They glassed 4 of our major cities from orbit before we even knew they were hostile. They killed 4 billion of our people in the first week of their invasion. Yes, we created diseases that destroyed them. Yes, we were thorough. We made certain that no Krell would ever threaten another world again. We did what we had to do to survive. And we would do it again without hesitation. On the Zirathi flagship, Kreneth listened to the exchange and felt his understanding of the galaxy shift beneath him. He had always known humans were dangerous. Every species knew that. But hearing Sarah Chen speak so calmly about genocide, about biological warfare, about creating and deploying weapons that most civilized species had banned thousands of years ago, made him realize that the galaxy had been making a terrible mistake. They had been thinking of humans as simply another warrior species, brutal perhaps, but ultimately understandable. Now he saw the truth. Humans did not fight wars the way other species did. They did not seek honorable victory or tactical superiority. When humans went to war, they went with the singular goal of ensuring that their enemy could never threaten them again. Ever. Total war. Complete annihilation. Not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate, almost pathological need for absolute security. On the monitoring station, a Manthari observer whispered to his colleague. "They saved the Zirathi." "Yes," his colleague replied. "But look at how the Zirathi are reacting." The cameras showed Zirathi officers on multiple ships, and not one of them looked relieved or grateful. They looked terrified, because they understood something that the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to comprehend. The Vextar swarm had been a nightmare, a horror that consumed worlds without mercy or hesitation. But the swarm was mindless, instinctive, predictable in its own way. Humans were none of those things. Humans were intelligent, creative, and absolutely ruthless when they decided something needed to die. The swarm killed because it was hungry. Humans killed because they made a conscious choice that their survival mattered more than the existence of their enemies. The Vextar were terrifying. The message from Admiral Kreneth reached Zirathi High Command within minutes, and the response was immediate. Emergency session. All senior military commanders and government officials were summoned to the Grand Chamber on the Zirathi homeworld. They gathered in a room that had witnessed thousands of years of history, where emperors had been crowned and wars had been declared, and now they faced a question that none of them had ever imagined asking. What do we do about the humans? Supreme Chancellor Vex Nor stood at the center of the chamber, his ancient face lined with worry that went deeper than the recent crisis with the swarm. "My people," he began, his voice echoing through the vast space. "We have been saved from the Vextar, but we must now confront a truth that many of us have tried to forget. We must remember why we feared the humans in the first place. We must remember what happened 50 years ago." A holographic display activated in the center of the chamber, showing historical records that had been sealed for decades. The younger members of the assembly leaned forward with curiosity. The older ones sat back with expressions of deep unease. They remembered. They had been there. The display showed the Krell Empire at the height of its power. A vast civilization that had conquered 40 star systems through overwhelming military might. They were brilliant strategists, fearless warriors, and completely merciless to those they considered inferior. When they discovered Earth, a small blue world on the edge of known space, they saw an opportunity. A primitive species with no real space force, no planetary defenses worth mentioning, no membership in the Galactic Council to protect them. Easy prey. The Krell Armada arrived in Earth's orbit with 500 warships and delivered a simple ultimatum. Surrender completely or be destroyed completely. The humans asked for time to consider. The Krell gave them 6 hours. When those 6 hours expired and the humans had not responded, the Krell began orbital bombardment. The holographic display showed cities burning. Massive craters where population centers had been moments before. Rivers boiling away under the heat of energy weapons. 4 billion human lives ended in the first week. The Krell expected immediate surrender after such a demonstration of power. Instead, they received a message from the human government. A message that every species in the galaxy should have paid more attention to. The message was only 7 words long. "You have made a terrible mistake. Come down." The Krell laughed at the audacity. They landed ground forces on Earth, expecting to crush any remaining resistance within days. What happened next became known as the Krell Extinction Event, and it was studied in military academies across the galaxy as an example of what happens when you underestimate a species that refuses to die. The humans did not fight the way the Krell expected. There were no grand battles, no honorable duels, no armies meeting in open combat. Instead, the Krell forces began to experience problems. Small problems at first. Equipment malfunctions. Communication disruptions. Supply shipments that never arrived. Then soldiers started getting sick. Not all at once, but in spreading clusters that moved through their ranks like invisible fire. The Krell had advanced medical technology. They analyzed the illness and discovered it was a virus, something that should not have been able to affect their biology. They created a treatment and distributed it to their forces. The illness stopped. For 3 days. Then a different illness appeared. This one attacked their respiratory systems. The Krell created another treatment. 5 days later, a third virus emerged, this one targeting their neural systems. The pattern repeated again and again. Every time the Krell adapted, a new disease appeared. Their medical officers began to realize the horrifying truth. The viruses were not natural. They were being engineered in real time, modified and released as fast as the Krell could develop immunity. The humans were conducting biological warfare on a scale that no one had ever seen before. But that was not the worst of it. The Krell fleet in orbit began to experience problems too. Ships that should have been perfectly maintained started having critical system failures. Life support malfunctions. Navigation errors. Weapons that fired on friendly vessels by mistake. The Krell discovered that humans had infiltrated their computer systems with viruses, not biological but digital. Code that rewrote itself, that learned and adapted, that spread through their networks like a plague. Every system the Krell relied on became suspect. They could not trust their sensors, their communications, their weapons, even their environmental controls. On the ground, Krell soldiers began to turn on each other. Paranoia spread faster than any disease. They saw humans everywhere, even where there were none. They suspected their own commanders of being compromised. Units refused to follow orders. Some ships fled the system entirely, abandoning their posts. The Krell Empire, which had seemed invincible just months before, began to tear itself apart from the inside. The humans barely had to fire a shot. They simply released their weapons, biological and digital, and let them do the work. Within 2 years, the Krell presence on Earth was completely eliminated. Within 5 years, the Krell Empire itself had collapsed. The species went extinct not because humans hunted them down, but because the diseases and chaos the humans had unleashed destroyed their ability to function as a civilization. Worlds that had belonged to the Krell for centuries fell silent. Their mighty fleet became ghost ships drifting through space, crews dead from illness or turned to madness. The galaxy watched in horror and learned a lesson. Never attack humanity. Never push them to the point where they decide you need to be eliminated. Because humans do not just win wars. They make sure their enemies can never threaten them again. Chancellor Vex nor paused the display and looked around the chamber. That is what we are dealing with. That is what just saved us from the Vextar. A species that does not know how to fight a war without making it existential. When humans go to battle, they do not think about victory. They think about extinction. Their enemy's extinction. A younger council member stood, his voice shaking slightly. But Supreme Chancellor, the humans saved us. They defeated the swarm. Surely that proves they can be trusted. Vex nor shook his head slowly. They saved us because it served their purposes. Because they want something from us, or because they want to prove something to the galaxy. The humans do nothing without reason. And now they are here, in our space, with their terrible weapons and their quiet voices offering help. The question we must answer is simple. What do they want? And what price will we pay for accepting their assistance? On the human flagship Indomitable, Admiral Webb received a communication request from Zirathi High Command. He looked at Sarah Chen, who had joined him on the bridge. They are ready to talk. Sarah nodded. Then let us go meet them. But Marcus, remember what we discussed. We need to be honest with them. We need to show them that we are not the monsters they think we are. Webb looked at her for a long moment. What if we are, Sarah? What if they are right to fear us? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Then we prove them wrong. The meeting chamber on the Zirathi homeworld was designed to intimidate. Massive pillars of crystalline stone rose 30 meters to a vaulted ceiling decorated with murals depicting 10,000 years of Zirathi military victories. Every species they had conquered, every battle they had won, every enemy they had crushed was immortalized in stunning detail above the heads of those who entered. It was a reminder that the Zirathi were not a weak people begging for scraps. They were an empire, and they would negotiate from a position of dignity even in their darkest hour. Sarah Chen walked into the chamber flanked by Admiral Webb and Dr. Ramirez, and she did not look up at the ceiling even once. She had seen enough displays of power in her career to know that they usually masked fear. The Zirathi were terrified, and no amount of artistic grandeur would change that fact. Supreme Chancellor Vex Nor sat at the head of a long table carved from a single piece of black stone. Around him sat the most powerful members of Zirathi government and military command. Admiral Kreneth was there, his 4 arms folded across his chest, his eyes locked on the humans with an expression that mixed gratitude and suspicion in equal measure. Vex Nor gestured to 3 seats across from him. "Please, Ambassador Chen. Sit. Let us discuss the price of our survival." Sarah sat slowly, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. Admiral Webb remained standing behind her, a silent presence that spoke of strength and readiness. Ramirez took the 3rd seat and immediately began setting up a small holographic display device. "Before we discuss price," Sarah said quietly, "let us discuss facts. The Vextar swarm has been broken. Our sensors confirm that the remaining creatures have fled beyond the edge of Zirathi space. They are heading back toward their point of origin, and our projections suggest they will not return to this sector for at least a decade, possibly never. Your colonies are safe. Your people can begin to rebuild." Vex Nor nodded slowly. "Yes. You defeated an enemy we could not stop. You saved our civilization from extinction. For that, we are grateful." His tone suggested that gratitude was a bitter taste in his mouth. "Now tell us what you want in return." The chamber fell silent. Every Zirathi in the room leaned forward slightly, waiting for the demand they knew was coming. Territory. Technology. Resources. Subservience. The humans had all the power now, and power always demanded payment. Sarah looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn. Then she spoke words that no one in the chamber expected to hear. "We want nothing from you." The silence stretched out for 5 full seconds. Then Vex Nor laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Nothing. You traveled across the galaxy, risked your ships and your people, deployed weapons that most species have banned for centuries, saved us from certain destruction, and you want nothing? Forgive me, Ambassador, but I do not believe you. No species does something for nothing. There is always a price. Always." Sarah's expression did not change. "You are right that there is always a price, Chancellor. But you are wrong about who pays it. We already paid. We paid 50 years ago when the Krell killed 4 billion of our people. We paid when we had to become something darker, something more ruthless than we ever wanted to be, just to survive. We paid when the galaxy looked at us with fear instead of friendship. That was our price. We do not ask you to pay it too." Admiral Kreneth spoke for the first time, his voice cautious. "Then why did you come? If you want nothing from us, why risk yourselves to save us?" Webb answered before Sarah could, his voice rough with emotion he usually kept hidden. "Because you needed help. Because innocent people were dying. Because we have the power to stop it, and choosing not to use that power would make us complicit in genocide. It is that simple." "It is never that simple," Vex Nor said sharply. "There are always ulterior motives, always hidden agendas. You humans are not saints. You are the species that committed genocide against the Krell. You are the ones who turned biological warfare into an art form. Now you expect us to believe you came here out of pure altruism?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice taking on an edge for the first time. "You are right. We are not saints. We did terrible things to the Krell. We would do them again if we had to. But let me tell you what else we are. We are the species that rebuilt after losing 4 billion people. We are the ones who chose to join the Galactic Council even though half of you voted against our admission. We are the ones who have responded to 17 distress calls in the last 15 years, asking for nothing in return each time. We are doctors and engineers and teachers who volunteer on alien worlds. We are diplomats who work for peace even when we are better at war. We are complicated, Chancellor. We are capable of great darkness and great light. Just like every other species in this galaxy." The holographic display that Ramirez had set up activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of Zirathi space. She spoke in her calm, clinical voice. "We have prepared a reconstruction plan for your damaged colonies. Medical supplies, construction materials, temporary housing for displaced populations. We can have the first shipments here within 72 hours if you give us permission to enter your space. We have also prepared detailed analysis of the Vextar biology and our viral agents. If they ever return, you will have the knowledge to defend yourselves without needing to call us. We are giving you everything we learned, everything we created, without restriction or cost." Vex Nor stared at the display, his expression unreadable.
Why?
Why give us weapons that you could keep for yourselves? Why share knowledge that gives you power over us? Because power that comes from keeping others weak is not real power, Sarah said simply. It is just fear wearing a crown. We do not want you to fear us, Chancellor. We do not want you to owe us. We want you to be strong enough to stand on your own, to defend yourselves, to thrive. Because a galaxy full of strong, independent species is safer for everyone, including us. One of the younger council members, a female Zirathi named Shar-XA, spoke up hesitantly. But what about the future? What happens the next time there is a crisis? Do we call you again? Do we become dependent on human intervention? Will you always come when we need you? Sarah smiled, and for the first time it was a genuine expression of warmth. That is up to you. If you need help, we will come. If you want us to stay away, we will stay away. We are not trying to build an empire, Counselor. We are trying to build something better. Trust. Friendship. A galaxy where species help each other not because they have to, but because they choose to. Vex Nor sat back in his chair, his eyes closed for a long moment. When he opened them again, something had shifted in his expression. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something else. Something that might have been hope. "You are either the most naive species in the galaxy," he said slowly, "or the most dangerous. Perhaps both." Sarah stood, and Webb and Ramirez stood with her. "Perhaps. But we are also the ones standing here offering our hand instead of making demands. The choice of what to do with that offer is yours, Chancellor. We will wait for your decision." As the human delegation left the chamber, Vex Nor looked around at his council. 3 months passed since the defeat of the Vextar swarm, and the galaxy watched humanity with wary eyes. The Zirathi accepted the human offer of aid, though the decision was far from unanimous. Construction ships arrived as promised, carrying materials and engineers who worked alongside Zirathi crews to rebuild the devastated colonies. Medical teams set up hospitals and treated survivors who still bore the psychological scars of watching their worlds consumed. Human diplomats moved through Zirathi space with quiet efficiency, offering help but never demanding gratitude, providing support but never seeking control. It was unsettling to every species that observed it, because it did not fit any pattern they understood. But the most unsettling thing was happening at the edge of explored space, where the Vextar had fled after their defeat. A human science vessel, the Discovery, sat in permanent orbit around the Vextar homeworld. Admiral Webb had assigned an entire task force to maintain a quarantine zone around the planet. No ships in, no ships out. The swarm was contained, trapped on their own world by human technology and human vigilance. When the Galactic Council demanded an explanation, Sarah Chen provided one that left them speechless. "We are not exterminating them. We are giving them a chance to exist without threatening others. The Vextar are a biological weapon that evolved naturally, but that does not mean they deserve extinction. They deserve containment. They deserve the opportunity to evolve into something less destructive. And we will watch over them until that happens, even if it takes 1,000 years." The concept was so alien to most species that they struggled to comprehend it. Humans had created weapons capable of wiping out the entire Vextar species in days, had demonstrated their willingness to use extreme force when necessary, and yet they chose mercy. Not weak mercy born from inability to act, but deliberate mercy from a position of absolute power. It was this contradiction that defined humanity in the eyes of the galaxy, and it was terrifying precisely because it was incomprehensible. On the Zirathi homeworld, Supreme Chancellor Vex Nor stood before his council once more, but this time the discussion was different. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. 6 different species had sent requests to Earth asking for assistance with various crises. Pirates attacking trade routes. Natural disasters overwhelming local response capabilities. Border disputes threatening to erupt into war. And in every case, humans had responded. Sometimes with military force, sometimes with medical aid, sometimes with simple diplomatic mediation. But they always responded, and they never asked for payment. Vex nor read through the reports with a mixture of awe and concern. They are building something. Not an empire in the traditional sense, but something perhaps more permanent. They are building trust. Admiral Kreneth, who had spent the last 3 months working closely with human engineers, nodded slowly. I have watched them work. I have seen how they interact with my people. They do not act superior even though their technology saved us. They do not demand obedience even though they have the power to enforce it. They simply help and then step back, allowing us to maintain our dignity. It is the most effective form of conquest I have ever seen, because it does not feel like conquest at all. The Galactic Council formally invited humanity to take a leadership position among the council members. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Too many species had witnessed what humans could do, and they wanted that power inside the council structure rather than operating outside it. The formal ceremony was scheduled for the first day of the new galactic year, and representatives from every member species would attend. When Sarah Chen received the invitation, she sat in her office on the council station for a long time, staring at the official document. Admiral Webb came to find her there, concern evident on his face. You should be celebrating. This is what we have been working toward for 15 years. Full recognition. Full acceptance. Sarah looked up at him with tired eyes. Is it? Or have we just scared them so badly that they want to keep us close where they can watch us? Webb sat down across from her. Does it matter? Either way, we have a seat at the table. We have a voice in galactic affairs. We can shape policy, prevent conflicts, help species that need it. This is a victory, Sarah. She nodded slowly. Then why does it feel like we just accepted a burden we might not be able to carry? The ceremony took place in the Grand Hall of the Galactic Council, a space station that had orbited the neutral world of Axios Prime for 3,000 years. Representatives from 37 species gathered to witness humanity's ascension to full council membership. Sarah Chen stood before them in her formal diplomatic uniform, flanked by Webb and a small delegation from Earth. The council speaker, an ancient being from the Axios species who had held the position for 2 centuries, addressed the assembly. Humanity has proven itself worthy of this honor through actions that speak louder than any words. They have defended the defenseless. They have shown mercy to enemies. They have asked for nothing while giving everything. We welcome them to this council with hope for the future and gratitude for the present. Sarah stepped forward to accept the ceremonial token of membership, a crystalline sphere that represented the unity of all galactic species. But before she could take it, an alarm sounded through the station. Emergency broadcasts lit up every screen in the hall. A new distress call was coming in from the far edge of known space. The Dolvari Confederacy, a small alliance of 3 species that had never been particularly important or powerful, was under attack. Their worlds were being invaded by a force they could not identify or resist. They were calling for help from anyone who would listen. The council speaker looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed expectation and something that might have been a test. Ambassador Chen, you now speak for humanity on this council. How do you respond to this crisis? Sarah did not hesitate. She touched her communication device and spoke clearly. This is Ambassador Chen to Earth Command. We have a distress call from the Dolvari Confederacy. Unknown hostile force. Prepare a response fleet and send them to Dolvari space immediately. Webb, who was already accessing tactical data on his own device, spoke quietly. Sarah, we do not have any treaty obligations to the Dolvari. We do not even have formal relations with them. This is not our fight. Sarah turned to look at him, and her eyes held the same determination that had driven humanity through every crisis they had faced. It became our fight the moment they called for help. That is what we do now, Marcus. That is who we have chosen to be. She turned back to the council speaker and accepted the crystalline sphere. On behalf of humanity, I accept this position with full understanding of the responsibilities it carries. We will honor the principles of this council and protect those who cannot protect themselves. And we will start right now. The human delegation left the ceremony immediately, heading for their ships. Behind them, the gathered species watched in silence. Some with gratitude, some with fear, some with hope, but all of them with the understanding that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. 4 days later, the human fleet arrived in Dulvari space to find a situation more complex than the initial reports had suggested. The hostile force was not invading in the traditional sense. They were refugees from a dying star system, desperately seeking new worlds to colonize and willing to fight for survival. The Dulvari had responded with violence, and the refugees had responded in kind, and now both sides were locked in a conflict that neither truly wanted but neither knew how to stop. Sarah Chen sat in the command center of the lead human ship and reviewed the situation with her senior staff. We could end this militarily in an hour. Deploy our forces, crush the refugee fleet, secure Dulvari space. Mission accomplished. Webb nodded. That would be the simple solution. But I do not think it would be the right one. Sarah smiled grimly.
No.
It would not. Send a message to both sides. Tell them we are here to mediate, not to conquer. Tell them there is enough space in this galaxy for everyone if we are willing to share it. Tell them that humanity did not travel all this way just to pick a side in someone else's war. We came to find a better solution. The message went out, and for the first time in weeks, the fighting in Dulvari space stopped. Both sides agreed to meet with human mediators, not because they trusted humanity, but because they feared what would happen if they refused. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah and her team worked tirelessly to broker an agreement. Territory was redistributed. Resources were shared. The refugees were given worlds to settle in exchange for technology and knowledge. The Dulvari accepted new neighbors in exchange for human protection and trade agreements. It was not perfect. It satisfied no one completely. But it was peace, and that was enough. When the human fleet finally departed Dulvari space, they left behind not conquered subjects or grateful vassals, but 2 species who had learned that there were alternatives to endless war. They left behind hope. Back on Earth, the news of the Dulvari resolution spread quickly. People celebrated in the streets, proud of what their representatives had accomplished. But in her private quarters aboard the ship carrying her home, Sarah Chen sat alone and wondered how long humanity could maintain this role. How many distress calls could they answer? How many conflicts could they resolve? How many times could they deploy weapons capable of destroying civilizations while choosing instead to build bridges? The burden of being the galaxy's guardians was heavier than anyone had anticipated, and it was only just beginning. Her communication device chimed with a new message. Another distress call, this one from a system she had never heard of. Another species in trouble. Another opportunity to prove that humanity could be trusted with the power they possessed. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment, allowing herself to feel the weight of exhaustion. Then she opened them again, straightened her shoulders, and began to compose her response. This is Ambassador Sarah Chen representing humanity and the Galactic Council. We have received your distress call. Please transmit all relevant information about your situation. Help is on the way. We are coming. She sent the message and looked out at the stars streaming past her viewport. Somewhere out there, people were waiting for salvation. Somewhere out there, humanity's next test was already beginning. And somewhere deep inside herself, Sarah Chen made a promise to everyone who would ever need help in this vast and dangerous galaxy. We will come when you call. We will fight when we must. We will show mercy when we can. We will not always be perfect, but we will always try to be better. This is humanity. This is who we choose to be. The Guardians. Not through conquest or intimidation, but through choice. Through the deliberate decision to use our power to protect rather than to dominate. And we will carry that burden for as long as the galaxy needs us to carry it, no matter how heavy it becomes. The stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the struggles of the small creatures who moved among them. But those creatures, human and alien alike, continued to struggle anyway. They built. They hoped. They helped each other. And slowly, painfully, imperfectly, they made the galaxy a little bit better than it had been before.